Well, in the Vineyard in the UK, we were quite a young church movement, and we only really had songs from Anaheim, California. And we found over the years that they got less and less, they felt less and less like us. And we started singing songs by Matt Redman and by Delirious. Well, they weren't called Delirious then, Cutting Edge. And we found that they were a bit more like us. And I guess we were at a place where we were just thinking, well, who are we as a relatively young church movement? And at that point, towards the end of the 90s, Brian showed up.
For me, it was like we had this guy, Graham Ord, in our church as the worship leader. So I just turned up 19 years old, just become a Christian, ended up in this church. Remember him saying, oh, hang around for a few months and be great if you could play guitar. So then Jimmy, who's off camera here, was playing drums at 15. And it was just in a school hall, and there was not really anything there, like this. It was just like you loved God, and yeah, of course I'll play guitar. I'd love to.
It's very hard to imagine what that was like now. You've got YouTube and massive worship movements like Hillsong and Bethel and all of that, but just none of that existed. The only way to get music was to be sent CDs or to go and buy them in a shop. And so, or just to hear the songs being sung and try and work them out. It's incredibly different to how it is now.
God was moving, wasn't he? Like we were just chatting earlier about just walking in and feeling the presence of God in worship, in the songs. And yeah, very cool.
I think it's fair to say there was a worship scene in the UK, a charismatic worship scene among other new churches. I guess we all ended up being part of the Vineyard movement, which was quite a young sort of church planting movement at the time. So we hadn't really worked out what that was, who we were, and just one or two people like Graham Ord were writing songs. Maybe some people were. Well, evidently they were, because when you came, you started saying, "Okay, who's written some songs? Let's start to hear them." But we didn't have particularly much organisational structure. I think Vineyard Records, or Vineyard Worship, as it was called, was basically there to distribute music from the States, and the idea of having something homegrown was quite a big idea, quite new, probably a bit scary, I guess. I don't know. And my understanding is that John Mumford called you and said, "Please come to the UK and help us."
Well, so what had happened was we had tried to launch a musical. We had Father's House. The album had succeeded, and then we tried to do a stage musical. It had collapsed after initially succeeding, and John Wimber called us one day and said, "Oh, I want to meet for breakfast." And he says, so Joyce and I went to meet with him. It's a little intimidating. And he's like, he says, my friends John and Ella Mumford from England were just asking about you, and we were having a discussion about our worship leaders need some input. And specifically, they're looking for somebody to help them develop their own writers and their own songs that come out of where they are in their culture. And I was like, oh, that's my favorite thing to do. No, truly. Like, I don't know why after the first few songs of mine, Faithful One, Refiner's Fire, went out around the early 90s, I was immediately asked to teach songwriting workshops. And I remember kind of going, I just started this, but I'm a son of two educators, so I race off to the library and sign out every book I could find on songwriting. And I go, I think I got some handle of how songwriting works, and I think I understand what our values are about intimacy and stuff. What if, instead of, like you said, importing music? So it was. I think that was the key for me, is that was the specific request. Come here and encourage songwriters who have a heart for worship and understand some of the basic Vineyard values. And so, the funny thing is how I actually met, some of the people in this room right now, is I I asked the pastors throughout the movement to send in VHS cassettes, whatever, video cassettes, to on the sly put up a camera at the back of the service, film the worship time, and try and get a sense for what songs were being used, who I felt like had potential, and I got this, all of these, and I sat there for days, like click, oh, like whatever, like I had all these different reactions, and then that's how I met some of you, and but it was always with an eye to, who has that spark to actually write and create, and who isn't just content just to keep on importing, their expression. And so then we would, I don't know if you remember the times where we would hang out. It was my favorite too. I would say, okay, like, who are you? Like, what's your sound? What's in your soul to express? And what's some existing music that feels like it sounds like you? And you guys would play all kinds of
I got into so much trouble that day.
Yeah.
Because I played a song by the Worldwide Message Tribe called Jumping in the House of God.
Oh,
yeah, you did. That's awesome.
And everybody else was like, oh no. But actually for me, it was a very precious time. This was even before we got into making Come Now's the Time. You called me out at the end of that meeting and had a major word for me about sounding the call of worship to the younger generation.
Yeah.
Which did me in then.
Yeah.
And it turned out to be something that happened for the next 20 years.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Which is incredible.
Significant role with writing some of those songs, and yeah, it's been amazing. So
yeah, they were great meetings. I don't know how you handled it.
Well, I mean, it was. The truth is, I came here out of a great defeat, out of a feeling broken, feeling disoriented. We had tried to do something and it hadn't worked out, and it had failed quite spectacularly as far as the musical collapsed and lost a lot of stuff. But we hadn't lost our character. We hadn't lost our friendships. And so there was something, I don't know, when I came here, in some ways I had nothing to lose, and I was just so grateful to actually be here, to actually have a job, to actually have somebody entrusted me to actually serve you guys. John and Ellie were amazing that way. Like, they just believed in me and believed I could pull something out of what was going on here. And I can't tell you how many times I felt like overwhelmed being in the middle of the circle of all of you and feeling like these guys are really great, and what am I doing here? And you know what I mean? That feeling like, and then it's probably everybody's kind of feeling that, right? Mm-hmm. And then we start making connections, and then we start sensing life and spirit and
what you did, it feels like the album project, which I remember had the working title of Sovereign or something like that.
Yeah.
Which then became known as Come Now's the Time.
Yeah.
But the album project felt like a project that you were running to sort of pull everybody in,
yes,
and get behind something. And obviously you identified writers and singers and worship leaders and musicians, and that's really where most of us ended up really becoming friends and working together.
But the thing was, the album project was just a public demonstration of what was happening behind the scenes. In other words, we were becoming friends. We were hanging together. We were growing together. And the reason why it was called Sovereign, because I did not want it to be called in the name of one of my songs, because my job as the Canadian coming in was to raise you guys up as the British and Irish and Welsh and Scottish, things. And I think in the end, I can't remember who overruled me. No, this song is opening a door. We're going to call it what it is. And I had to, okay. It's probably John and Ellie. And they were right in the sense that something was, yeah.
Did you write that here, did you?
Yeah, I had gone through the collapse of the musical, coming here, not knowing a soul, starting completely over relationally. And it was one morning walking on my morning exercise walking streets in London. And, you know, I say sometimes I felt like in those days my faith was barely hanging on because we had just found out about our son having Fragile X syndrome. He would require care for the rest of his life. The musical had collapsed. Like there was just a lot of things that had been really hard. And so I was grateful that I could come. I was grateful that somebody trusted me to even give me a job. But privately, there was moments where I was thinking, oh man, like I have no idea what's up or down. And it was on one of those morning walks. I'm just walking. I'm just, okay, Lord, good morning. I'm here, just getting my exercise. If you have something to say, whatever, but I'm, just all of a sudden there's this crackling. It's like, it's hard to describe. This happened to me twice in my life. It happened on the day I wrote Refiner's Fire, but all of a sudden, one moment there's nothing, and then there's this like energy. It's like, and it's crackling, like it's got like electricity, and I'm like completely covered. It's almost like tingling in my fingers and shooting up, and I'm like, I'm just walking down the street, minding my own business, but my heart is like always like this, and then all of a sudden, come now, and it's literally in this crackling energy. There's this sound, and then there's this penetrating, and it came with the melody, come, now is the time to worship. Yeah, and I do remember part of it was like, now? like come now is the time. Like, it was like because of my own, which is why lyrics like come just as you are in the song, because I was barely hanging on. I was struggling in some ways, and yet I was very grateful to be here. So it's all of that mixed in, right? And I remember racing back to our house and racing up to the top floor, and we had a little electric piano, and I had there's no like smartphones, easy way to record a voice memo. And I remember just, and I would play the melody over and over again to try and imprint it. And Joyce is downstairs, goes, Brian, the kids, they're going to be late for school. But I'm coming. I hope I don't forget this, because it was special. Like I knew there was something there. And and that, away we go. But
do you think, it's funny, isn't it? Because it's like you coming in a state where you're barely hanging on.
Yeah.
But you actually came to probably a group of people who were in all kinds of mess, Yeah. And
all kinds of potential at the same time, right? Exactly, it was all there, right?
But that thing of, because I remember that come just as you are.
Yeah.
It's such a simple thing, but that was the Vineyard, that was our thing, wasn't it? Come as you are.
Yeah.
Come as you are. Don't.
Yeah.
Still is.
You don't have to.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't have to get it together. Just come to His presence, and it's a very very powerful thing, In the same way as like, I mean, they were right to believe in you, weren't they? And you were right to believe in us.
Yeah.
It's like something happened.
Yeah. It's still happening though, because that's why I'm here today too. Is that I'm the newbie, just but he's what you're talking about and how you came into relationship. That's exactly how we have been. So, and for me, like coming in as like I've seen all of your names on all of the liner notes. I have all the albums. So to sit here in England with people that my dear friend has like, you're still bringing people together. You're still kind of magical.
I have a question for Wendy.
Yeah.
So you're the voice of that song. It opens the album. Yours is the first voice everybody hears. How did you get into this?
Well, so my first memory of meeting you, Brian, was you came to Southend Vineyard and did it like a songwriting type workshop thing. And because Southend Vineyard kind of started, most people that went, we were all young, we were lots of creative sort of musicians and hadn't been to church, most of us. We didn't know what church was. And so there was a lot of inspiration. So we were kind of writing our own songs, and so church was the songs that we wrote, and it was and Kevin Posh songs basically. So that was it. So and a mixture of the two, and and then we quite often would have different people come and visit, you know, and David Roosh used to come, and who else came? Yeah, he came a lot to Southend, and but yeah, so you came to visit, and we did this songwriting workshop, and that was the first time I met you, and kind of we all shared songs and stuff, and I had no idea that actually I think there was another thing going on. I didn't know what your purpose was being here, what your job was, that you were, you know. The next thing was I get this phone call, and you know, I was young and my life was pretty messy. You know, I loved Jesus, you know, but my life was messy, and you know, still is. And so I get this phone call, and you're like, you know, but what I really love looking back was it wasn't like we're going to make an album. It wasn't like that. It was like we're getting together, and you know, we're just going to worship with all the songs that different people have written, and I've gone round and I've met different people. Just be really great to get together. Had no idea what would happen with this, and it was like, well, we're going to record it. We're just going to worship, because we did it at Putney in the school, and that's where they had church. And I'd been to that church, so I'm thinking, oh, well, they're just going to record what we're doing at church. That's kind of what I had in my head. And
so you didn't know this was going to be an album?
I kind of did, but I didn't. It didn't register really. I knew there was something special happening. I knew there was something special happening, and I knew that when you said you want to be part of it, I kind of thought, what, me? Like, and I thought it was a mistake. I thought, well, obviously you don't know what's really going on with me. Otherwise, you wouldn't ask me to be part of this. There's no way that I should be, you know. And you were like, yes, no, I do know. I do know. And yes, we do want you to be part of it. And I was like, wow, okay, all right then. And I just remember us coming together and singing those songs for the first time. And just...
the tone of your voice and some of the fragility in the way you sing that back then really knowing that really makes sense. Like it really means something.
Well, there was... I mean, honesty, there was just a vulnerability to your voice that was very tangible. Like, it was kind of like you were saying, okay, this is me, you know. So when you're singing, come just as you are, you're going that way yourself.
Yeah, because that's how I become a Christian. It's like I can only come as I am, and it's still the same today, you know, with all my baggage, you know, all my mess. And he's just blows me away every day of how good he is. And it's still the same today as it was then. And there was a song on that album that we did that a girl wrote in my church, Siewert. Take Me As I Am.
Jesus, take me as I am.
Take Me As I Am. And I got saved with that song. That was one of the first songs I heard walking into church. And you know, and to be singing that. And I remember we did a rehearsal on the Sunday morning at the church, and I remember I couldn't get through the song.
It wasn't a rehearsal, we were playing for the service.
Yes.
On the Sunday morning.
Yes, yeah.
At South West London Vineyard.
That's right, yes, we were. It was the morning service.
Yeah.
And I couldn't get through it. I was just so overwhelmed.
I remember
that, you know, the words of that song were so precious, you know, and it's still the same, isn't it, you know? He does take us.
Just going back to Come Now Is the Time, this is a controversial opinion. I don't think there's a better arrangement out there than the one that we did on that recording, because it goes from almost nothing to absolutely massive, and then back to nothing, and it's a big. Your thing was always, I've taught this to so many people since. You get a band, there are 6 people in the band, everybody plays 1/6. This was a band with about 15 people in. Everybody plays 1/15. We rehearsed it, all the songs, and on the night, I don't think, well, I certainly hadn't, and probably many of us hadn't been involved in any kind of live recording like this where you had to rehearse and then remember everything on the night and then play everything right on the night. And there was most songs, there was a chance to do them maybe one more time. And we did that song 3 times on the night, at the beginning, the middle, and the end, because the people because these were all songs that nobody knew really in the congregation.
Yeah.
And every time the key change with the saxophone and electric guitar solo, goosebumps every time.
I remember Steve Gregory playing that sax solo.
And James White on electric.
Was it you or
James?
James doubling him.
Yeah.
And I remember the key change went up and I was watching the however many hundred people were there. And then I just started I had this just deep sense, okay, this is why I went through all of what I went through in order to end up here at this moment with these precious people. I was just almost completely undone. I was like, how do I keep going and get through the rest of the night? Yeah, it was
So a lot of those moments of like where, because I remember on that Sunday morning, so I was working in secondary schools at the time, like going around doing like Christian work in secondary schools, high schools. And Nigel would always sort of encourage me about that. And he said, This
is at the end of the service, after
the end
the
of the
ministry
Sunday service. So it's like we got the recording in the evening. He prays for me and I'm just like a puddle. It's like all the bones left my body and I just sort of fall. And I
didn't really know what
stop
to do.
crying. I just couldn't stop crying with this sort of heart for young people. But yeah, it was just like God would just sort of grab, he just sort of go, all right, I'm going to get you now.
Yeah.
And the person
and the presence of God was with us. As soon as we all came together from that moment, it was worship. You know, it wasn't like,
Yes.
we just worshipped, didn't we? We just worshipped.
I remember you pulled a few people in on the Friday afternoon. We rehearsed all week, and you pulled a few people in on the Friday afternoon just to listen to where we'd got to. And I remember Eleanor Mumford calling Debbie Wright, who had moved. John and Debbie who are now the national directors of Vineyard, but they'd not long moved to Nottingham to plant a church, calling them saying, whatever you do, you have to be here on Sunday for this recording. And people just, I don't know, it's just like there was just a real buzz, sense of excitement about it.
It was a weird thing because when we had all, like Paul Burton, who's over there, had all his ADATs set up and mixing desk and in that other room, and we were kind of in there, and then I remember coming out into the hall and there was all these people there. Yeah. And I was just like, this is a thing, right? This is like, what's going on?
Crazy.
Yeah. And there was so much excitement in the room and like people were, you just felt like people were thrilled that this was happening and this was coming from this place. And, you know, like, it was amazing that it all came together, really. It's like, because we didn't know each other. Yeah. I think I met you and you.
I was definitely, as far as knowing when it was going to become a record, I didn't want to rush the process. I didn't want to record covers. What I wanted was to have enough songs that felt like they were ready to be shared and they were already working. I mean, there would be maybe a couple of the songs that hadn't been really tried out that much that kind of came in right at the last minute. But for most of the songs, I mean, it's like Wendy's describing a song that had been used at Southend. There were different songs like The Lord is Gracious by Graham Ward already being used, you know, those kinds of things. And, you know, Come Now's the Time, Lord Reign in Me.
Who is like our God.
Who is like our God. Those songs were already being used. So we're just waiting till you hit that almost tipping point so that we could feel like, and I felt we were becoming a we. Like there was some synergy happening relationally. And I was also waiting for it to be like that it would sound like this group and like it came from the British Isles, that it didn't come from America or Canada or Australia or I wanted it to feel in every way like it sounded like here, like the people are here. And of course, that means a diversity of musical styles and influences
And Brenton, of course,
and Brenton.
because he's South African.
Yeah. And yet he was, for quite a long season transplanted here and serving at the St. Albans Vineyard. And
Bless him.
Oxford, yeah.
Oh, Oxford.
So,
That's right. Cherwell Vineyard. Sorry.
I mean, so many songs on this collection of songs have stayed in my repertoire, like that I go back to, like All Who Are Thirsty. That just doesn't really get old.
No.
That refrain, and it's so easy for people to sing, and it's so powerful. Holy Spirit, come. That it's.
Thank you, Brenton.
Yeah.
It's good value.
What's interesting is I'd done like Light the Fire Again and some other earlier Vineyard stuff where it's like we as Canadians went to Anaheim, California. We recorded there. It wasn't about trying to make, okay, what does Californian worship sound like, or what does Canadian worship sound like? The focus was completely just on songs and relationships. But coming here, there was something, and I don't know whether it's has to do with the geography. I don't know all the reasons why, but I felt very focused that it should sound like here. So there was a sense, I sensed something special was happening, and I sensed that the time was right, but I didn't know that it would travel as far as it did. But what was happening, truthfully, is like when you had the rise of Cutting Edge becoming Delirious, you had Matt Redman, you had there was a number of things kind of happening here in this part of the world that were about to kind of, be exported, not only bless people here, but be exported. And I think this was just probably a part of that. I mean, the crazy thing was we hadn't even recorded the project, because recording is a way of really, in a tangible way, sharing this with people in the world. But we hadn't even gotten to the recording. And Come Now's the Time and several of the other songs were starting to be sung around the world, because people would pass through the Southwest London Vineyard and they would hear the song in the service, and then they would sneak up onto the stage afterwards and they would grab charts or whatever and they'd make off. And all of a sudden we hear, this church in South Africa and this church over here, they're singing the song, and they're writing back, have you recorded this? Well, we actually plan to, but we're not there yet,
Do you think that, because we were chatting about this a bit earlier, but there was such a move of the Holy Spirit going on here, and sort of my experience was walking into a church, presence of God was really tangible.
Yes.
People were falling over.
Yeah.
Things were happening. It was quite crazy at times, but quite amazing. And it was all sort of around worship, and we would worship for long periods of time, and we were sort of like, because you can write a song, can't you? You can sit down and try and write a song, but there's something about songs coming out of that moment, which I think it's like, we say, how do I write a song which is going to be significant or travel? But it's like, actually, we need a move of God. We don't need more songs.
Yeah, the traveling of it going places is completely out of our hands. And so it's like this. But the thing, what I heard, and I think it's been a hallmark of the Vineyard kind of experience, is people just entering a place and then almost like starting to cry because they sense it's this tenderness, and it's like people feel undone because they feel like they're entering the presence of love, right?
Yes, yeah.
Like it's like this enveloping, all-encompassing, unconditional love, and whenever somebody encounters love, you either are going to, it's either going to open you up or you're going to be like, try and shut it down, right? And songs can be this, they just carry some of that, right? They in the lyrics, we were singing, in Holy Fire, waiting in expectancy, surrender to your sovereignty. We're hungry for true intimacy. Like, Like there's so much of that hunger in the world, but people don't know where to turn. And then when people walk into something and all of a sudden they sense it, right? It's
I think that's really stirring up in people again as well, like that hunger for true intimacy with God. And you know, I'm seeing locally where I am, there's a real move of God happening. And just in Sunday night in a Church of England church where I've been going, and usually the worship would stop like 7:30, and the guy, just this young lad leading worship, and he just carried on and on and on, and we all just carried on worshipping till like 10:30. Just doesn't happen really, you know. And it was a real sense that, and I just thought it was no accident now that we're singing these songs again, and you know, that what was happening there. I just feel like there is like a new, not a new, but like there's another sort of special something going on. And
I think
these songs captured that then.
There's another season for that song. I was just struck by Hungry for True Intimacy and how the follow-up to this album was an album called Hungry, which we did 1 year later, or many of us did. And again, it's just like almost feels like, even just that song, that line feels like a forerunner to which at the time I think Hungry then went on to be like a really big seller again in those days before YouTube and all of that.
For marketing plans and all of that. Yeah, I mean, it's the timing, you know, is so important, and all of these intangibles, or I don't even know what the right word is, but you're just thankful that you find yourself in the middle of this, and it's a real gift, you know.
Yeah.
A real gift.
Well, I sensed that hunger again. So I went to Nigel's church in Winchester a few weeks ago. I was in Aylesbury on Sunday and in Bedford. And there's this kind of hunger again, you know. And I think part of it is the people who were around for that stuff in the 90s are still around, you know, most of them. But then it's their kids and the people who haven't, you know, experienced that. And for me, it would be like one of the most powerful times I think we had was we had a little meeting in a front room just before you left. And it was just a very simple, you know, just an acoustic guitar, some people in the room, and the presence of God. And true worship. It's like, I was kind of really encouraged by the Asbury outpouring, because that seemed like the same thing, you know, of just like, because it's quite confusing sometimes for young people to know what is, you know, a great production and a great song, and what is God, and what is both of those things together, and how does it, you know. So when I became a Christian and was asked to play in church, it was the least cool thing in the world that I could possibly be doing. And everybody thought I joined a cult and was gone mad, you know, because I was playing in normal bands, and, you know, it was, you don't want to play in church, Mark's gone crazy, you know. Whereas now I think it's like, well, it's actually quite cool. You know, there's a stage and there's lights and there's this and that, and people look a bit cooler than, you know, thank God there was no videos. You know, we were doing it. Because there is one, but I think like that, you know, there's something about the kingdom where he's looking for the lowest and the overlooked and the, you know, the hurting and the disadvantaged, and sometimes it looks from the outside quite a different thing, but I think when things are stripped back to just sort of raw heart worship and simplicity and his presence, you know, and the gifts of the Holy Spirit, stuff like that, you know, it's like the bread and butter of church. That's the thing which is going to sustain you through life, isn't it? It's not the gig, you know. We can go to amazing gigs, but it's the thing that happens, you know.